Hey guys, my name's Marlon. Today I'm just going to be answering some of your questions about how I like to fish swim baits and glide baits for big flathead. So basically I've just been using the swim bait gear similar to what you'd use for cod. It's just a swim bait rod, obviously, with a 150 size bait cast reel. Match that with 30-pound braid and leader. Generally find that's more than enough, obviously, to deal with the flatties and their teeth, but more so just so that you don't cast off these lures, as they are reasonably heavy. You don't want to obviously cast them off. So basically I've just been using, it's a pretty simple technique, nothing too fancy about it. Basically it's just a long cast. Try and fish with the wind as much as possible, helps with the casting distance, and the flatties can be a bit spooky sometimes up on the flat, so a long cast with the wind. Generally then it's just a slow wind, back to the boat obviously, and then repeat, but I try and keep as many pauses in as I can, so at least probably 2 pauses every cast, sometimes more. Basically the deeper the water, you want to pause it more, try and let that lure sink down so it's near the bottom as much as possible, because generally I've been using the sinking versions of swim baits and glide baits and fishing probably that 1 to 2 meters worth of water, and just try and keep that reasonably close to the bottom. Sometimes the flatties will come up and have a look at it, but you want to try and keep it close to the bottom as much as possible. Not really with the flathead. The only thing, or the only tip that I could really say for that is just to pause it. Sometimes you'll see the flatties, they'll kind of stalk the lure, I guess you could say. They swim up behind it and you can kind of see them, or they'll come up and have a strike. A lot of the time, if you just let that lure just sit there and just sink slowly back down to them, as I said, generally using the sinking version, so it just sinks back down to them, and a lot of the time they'll smash it on the drop. So that's probably the only tip I can give in that regard. Not really. Generally just fish when I can, and just try and find those concentrations of fish. So that's going to be different depending on which system you like to fish. Obviously it's going to be different if you're up north, or if there's a system with lots of weed. Basically just move around until you can find where the fish are, and that may change depending, as I said, on the system, or what time or tide it is, but it's kind of different on all systems. The system I generally fish, I haven't found that tide plays a big factor. I generally fish areas that don't actually have a heap of current or a heap of tide, so generally it doesn't make too much of a difference, I don't find. It kind of depends on the system, but in the systems that I like to fish, it's generally pretty sandy. There's not a heap of weed beds or anything like that, so I like the sandy, the sandy or the muddy bottoms mostly, and just flat or something like that holds a little bit of structure, whether that be a little channel or sometimes rock bars, or oyster banks or something like that. Even snags and things like that are on flats tend to sometimes hold congregations of fish. So generally I find that the flatties, they kind of group up in a certain part of the flat or a certain part of a bank, and I try to fish those points or those sections of bank as much as possible, and just have confidence that the lure's going to tempt those bigger fish to bite eventually. Not really. Don't tend to use chin weights. Haven't really even tried. I generally just fish the shallower areas, so as I said earlier, up to around 2 meters is probably the deepest that I'd probably fish. In saying that, as I said, I haven't used it, so there's no reason that it wouldn't work. I just find it's easier to fish the shallower areas with these lures, and that's where I find a lot of the bigger fish kind of hold, so that's the reason that I haven't really used them. short answer, yes, I believe it is. The only thing I can add to that is just don't cast the lure off. So I try and fish, as I said earlier, the heavier line classes, so like 30 pound, and the bigger swim bait rods and reels, so that you don't cast those lures off, because if you buy a lure and cast it off, it's probably not going to be worth your money.